Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Gurumurthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to remarkable people about their big ideas and the events in their lives that have helped shape them. My guest today is a man with lots of big ideas, and he's also a man who changes the world with them. Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist based in Oxford, but he's perhaps most famous as the world's biggest atheist. His writing, his lectures argue the case for why God is a delusion, the name of one of his most famous books. And he's got a new one out at the moment, which is sort of a children's book based on the same ideas, and it's called Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide to Atheism. I normally end this podcast with a question, which is, if you could change the world, how would you change it? I think in your case, we should probably start with that, because I'm assuming you'd want to change the world by ridding us of religion altogether.
Well, I would, but I think I generalise that to anything that's not evidence-based, where factual knowledge is concerned. So I would also like to rid the world of superstition of all kinds. And I mean, things
astrology
like
and
astrology and water divining and homeopathy and all sorts of things which are based on emotion and tradition, revelation, authority, rather than on evidence.
I mean, a lot of people would say you want to get rid of sort of anything that's based on feelings. You know.
Well, I'm very fond of feelings where art is concerned and music is concerned, poetry is concerned. I'm deeply moved by great art, great poetry, great music. And that's fine, that's feelings, but that's not about what's factually true. So things that might or might not be factually true, there we need evidence and evidence only.
Why do you think that would make the world a better place?
Well, for one thing, because facts are so wonderful.
This is all sulfur, brimstones that took fire, in contrary to those ones. You see? They have burnt brimstones, all of them. Underneath them you can see it's burnt, this black ash on all of them. As you see, the rocks are everywhere. At the center of the valley, okay, so here you can see kind of a 90 degrees angle structure.
This structure has clearly been built on a man-made elevated platform.
So if you see, we even see a staircase behind the ziggurat. Hasn't been used for 3,500 years. I'm gonna use it again. Tusk, the eye is the size of an elephant. Maybe a statue that got totally destroyed also during the fire. Look at that. It's amazing. That was ancient streets all around here. Streets. Continue.
The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham gat up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt.
Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plain. In Genesis 19, we read how these cities were destroyed by God with brimstone and fire from heaven, the first biblical record of God's vengeance upon evil since the Great Flood. My husband, biblical archaeologist Ron Wyatt, never planned to search for these cities, but in 1989, while working on another project, he was suddenly impressed to stop and examine some odd-shaped, whitish-colored formations along the western shore of the Dead Sea. After driving past these at least 30 or 40 times in the past 12 years, this time they suddenly looked like the shapes of city walls and buildings. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets. And along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this to convince others.
Take it away, Kevin. What can you
Okay.
tell us about Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, first of all, a lot of people think all the cities are under the south end of the Dead Sea, that you cannot see them.
Okay.
But we're told by Josephus, the traces or shadows of the 5 cities are still to be seen. This was in the 1st century, and the water level has not risen since that time. We should be able to see them also. And so when Ron Wyatt in 1989 was driving along the Dead Sea, the one road along the Dead Sea there that goes through Israel, he saw these light color formations. In the background, you can see Masada in this image. See Masada is much darker. In the foreground, you see the soil is much darker. But in the middle bottom there, going horizontally, you see the ashen remains of Gomorrah.
So that's right on this. I mean, we can see it in this photograph.
Yes,
They didn't disappear, as some people say, into the sea.
And these are ashen formations. These are not just natural sedimentary rock and so forth. And so this is an image up to the north. This is of Admah near Jericho.
Okay.
And again, you see the light color ash.
It's very distinct, isn't it?
Yes, it stands
different.
out. Right. And then it is a soft material compared to what you would see normally in some type of soil. And then here is inside one of the cities. This is probably in Gomorrah. In the distance, you can see some right angles A sign of, again, man-made construction.
Now, I lived in a province in Canada called Alberta for some time when I was younger, and there was an area there called Drumheller, and it had rock formations called hoodoos, is what they called them there.
Okay.
And it was where they found a lot of dinosaur bones from erosion and things like that. And people might argue that, well, those are just hoodoos, or those are like what we see in Arizona, but at closer inspection, that is not what we're seeing here. Even I can see that.
Yeah, it's a combination of burned limestone and brimstone or sulfur is what it is. The ash has been analyzed and so forth. And here's a nice image here of a nice 90-degree angle with a straight edge. Again, sign of some type of man-made construction in the ashes there.
Right, because even though we see, like we talked about Arizona, where you have these rock formations that have been dug out by wind erosion years and years, they're usually rounded things. They're not going to be square. Like you have arcs and things of that nature, but nothing like this.
Yes, these stand out. And then here's an image I shot of, it looks like an arched entrance into the remains there. You have to be very careful when inspecting these sites. I've seen a lot of people. Last time I was there, I saw more and more evidence. I was back there in November. More and more evidence that people are inspecting these sites. People were stopping and getting out when we were there to inspect them. But there was a tour group that went out there and they found a hole on top of the remains here, and the people started gathering around it, and it fell through.
Ooh.
And 5 people died.
Really?
It's hard to breathe in ash. And so you have to be very careful trying to go into the remains.
So now there's another risk of this whole discovery here, that although we are finding more information about this area, I mean, if there are deaths happening there, it could be quite plausible that the Israeli government could say that's enough, we're closing this off.
Yes, they could at some point, but the tour groups are not going out there anymore. Of course, the tour leaders don't want to be held accountable for something happening.
Oh, so this
like
did
that.
not happen most recently in November?
Not recently, no.
Okay.
But sometime in the past. So you have to be careful when going out there. So here's another image we could see on one of the streets. In the distance, you can see some beautiful 90-degree angles jutting out from the formations.
That definitely looks like a building of some type.
Yes, right. More evidence of man-made construction. And then here's a little closer shot of it. Really impressive, jutting out.
So now the walls are there, but now we see a lot of sediment around the walls and water erosion over the years. What is all that sediment there?
That's more of the ash that's just run down, the loose part of it that has worked its way down. There is some rain out here, not a whole lot. It does get a lot of wind erosion, as you spoke of, in this area. So most of the cities, they're in poor condition, but they're 3,500 years old. Very old remains, and it's rather soft material, so you can't expect them, to look perfect at this point.
Now, Paul knew about these. He knew about these cities. He spoke of them. Now, is there any evidence to suggest, or do you know that people have always known that these cities are there, and it's just in recent times that we've dismissed it?
Well, Josephus did say that he saw the brimstone. Josephus said he saw Lot's wife's pillar. And then he said traces or shadows of the cities are still to be seen. So it was documented in the first century, that they were there. And, Paul does say that they're a sign or example unto us, unto the ends of the world. And that example there is a visible example. And that's what we're seeing here, are signs of God's past judgment that we need to heed. Because this is going to happen again in the future when the lake of fire and brimstone, it falls down. So. And then here's another shot of some of the remains. Again, 90-degree angles coming out from the formations. And then here's a shot. This is like a 90-degree turn here. It's basically a square structure sticking out from the ash. It continues around the other side. So you have multiple 90-degree angles on this building.
Are there any assumptions as to what some of these things may have been? I know that Michael in his series on Sodom and Gomorrah mentions one area that looks like it would have been a temple.
Yes, there are some that are singular structures that do appear to be a large square-looking building. So yeah, I think we may have an image of one here in the slides. Now here is a swirling effect of thermal ionization, they call it, where there's a swirling effect where the electrons repel and attract, and these remains were swirling in the extreme heat, 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you see the swirling effect in a lot of the remains there.
And this is documented by those who know about these scientific phenomena here that happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now here it says the ash there today is composed of calcium sulfate and calcium carbonate, which are byproducts of the limestone and sulfur burning. So the ash there is made of the correct composition of the buildings, the limestone burning up, and the brimstone being there, the sulfur. At the days of Elijah, when his altar was consumed, God sent down fire and it consumed the stone altar. So we should expect the buildings there to also be consumed and turned to ash. God's fire is a consuming fire, and that's what he did that day. He consumed all the buildings.
So the chemistry doesn't lie.
Right.
This proves that there was a building here. These are not just geological formations.
Yes, it's a testament, to what happened there. And here's a couple of ziggurats on a raised formation that I saw. They're side by side. They're made of a wider material, like a ziggurat. And here's a close-up of the side of one of them. It looks like it's almost running down the ash there. And
it's strange how I've seen in some natural history museums where different cultures, to embalm their dead, they would take them to a dry, high place like the top of a mountain, where the bodies would essentially dry out and turn to a leather-like substance. And that's kind of what we have here, is it's preservation through a very dry climate. So that God has preserved this as a warning, like you had said, so that no one can argue that these are the sites.
Yes, they are well enough preserved where we can see the formation, we can see the brimstone, and we'll see later here an image of cremated bone. So people were consumed in these ashes.
Say on.
So in Genesis 19:24, then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So we should expect to see brimstone there. And on the side of that former formation that we saw just a minute ago, I saw some brimstone embedded in the side of it there. It was in a hardened shell. This brimstone, when it burns, the outer part of it turns to a liquid, and when it cools down, it has a hardened shell. And so in this graphic here, I'm using a knife to open it up, and inside you can see the unconsumed sulfur inside of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then here is an image of something that appears to have melted. It's pulled down in the bottom, and the upper part of it here has got holes in it, like it's bubbling, extreme heat. I thought this was very interesting here.
Yeah, it looks like almost like a lava rock.
Yes, right. And then here is an image of, this could have been a temple. On the left, it's in the graphic behind us here, but on the left we see some type of singular ziggurat, and on the right we see a tower. This is a popular location. There's actually dinner parties that happen right out here. It's like the locals recognize, this formation is unique. And yeah, I've been there twice, and they were holding nighttime parties there with elaborate lights set up and a sound stage. And
so come have a party in hell.
A party, right, with all these people, poor people died.
So this is, now obviously this struck you as something significant because you went to the expense of putting it on canvas. So what else holds special significance for this this site, or is it just an interesting?
Well, it's very unique. Looks like a man-made structure here. You have the ziggurat and you have the tower. So this is a very impressive picture right here. A lot of people get this photo. But here is a picture again of the ziggurat standing all alone there. And then next, this is very impressive. These are windows. You see a square windows going horizontally across here. Very striking to see this in the sides of the formations.
Even if someone could argue that these are not walls, what in the world are square holes doing in the side of them?
Right, these are all squares, every one of them there going across horizontally. And here's a little closer shot
Wow.
Yeah, it's stunning to see this. You don't see that, in nature, something like this. Very impressive. And this, again, this is in ash.
And even afterward, why would people come to this site and carve things on the side?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense
And this
either.
is high up. This is not down low. This is up high. It's hard to get to. Now, on the edge of most of the cities were a sphinx shape. And here we see a sphinx at the edge of Gomorrah. Perhaps it was designed to protect the city, but it did a poor job that day, I think.
Now, if you saw that at just one location, you might say, well, like Golgotha, the place of the skull where Christ was crucified, there is a natural rock formation there that looks like a face. One could argue this, but there's similar sphinxes at each one of the cities.
Yeah, I've heard that they're in each of the cities, yes. Now here's another. I'm standing by it here to get a size perspective, and you can see the nice sphinx design to it. Of course, after 3,500 years, it has eroded away, but you can still see some type of design here. So, and next, our friend Jason was climbing up the remains, trying to get to a large chunk of brimstone in the side of the remains. When you see a large chunk, it's nice to try to go after it. And he was able to climb up there and retrieve this large piece of brimstone.
And what he's walking in there, you could see it was not sand, it was ash.
Yes.
Something had burned there.
Loose material, right. And then here's another image of the brimstone that I found. It has like a burned ring around it. In the center of the cluster there on the center right is some unconsumed sulfur.
Okay.
So again, the burn ring, and inside you have the sulfur.
Now we have a box here in front of us that we'll be going through at some point, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And we'll be able to show you at home what we are looking at here, because all of these things that Kevin is talking about, we're going to see up close and personal.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that. It's coming up.
Yeah. And so here is a piece of brimstone inside a hardened shell. Again, when the brimstone's on fire, the outside of it is liquid. When it cools down, it turns into hardened crystals. And that's what we have there, are some hardened crystals around that.
Now, how hard is it to open? You have your knife in there.
It's very, very stiff. It's very hardened. And so here's a piece without the hardened shell on the outside of it. There was some underneath it, but that's another piece of brimstone.
Now, that's the piece that is very pure sulfur that is found nowhere else on Earth, correct?
That's right. This sulfur is 95% pure sulfur. It's the monoclinic form of sulfur. Most sulfur you find naturally is the rhombic type that it's a more yellow color, but it's only 50% sulfur. So there's a big difference. So God rained down a unique type of sulfur to do this work. And so he left behind a marker for us to see that, these sites are real. So in one of our trips here, there's this large cluster here on this large rock over here, or actually a piece of ash, and I'll show you a close-up of it. Here's the top of it. Now, what we're seeing on top of this, all of this on top of it are the hardened crystals. So there were hundreds of pieces of brimstone underneath this burning. It turned into a big pool of liquid. And when that big pool of liquid is about 6 feet long or so, when that pool of liquid cooled down, it left these crystals on top of it. On top there, the upper part of the photo, are the crystals. In the center across here horizontally is the unconsumed sulfur or brimstone.
That white section there.
That white section, yeah. So very, very impressive find. Again, on top of the crystals, you see the brimstone in the center going horizontally. Very impressive find. Here's another image of it. You see the brimstone sticking out, the crystals on top. I mean, you're not going to find this anywhere else on Earth. This is totally unique.
So does the government of Israel allow people to go in and take sulfur? They don't mind?
They do. The area is so large, there's no limit as far as I know.
Let the whole Earth be warned. Take yourself
Yes.
home a piece of brimstone
Yes.
and don't do this.
Right. And so here is a close-up of some of the layers. Sometimes there's layering effect. In the background was the Sphinx shape we saw earlier.
Ah, okay.
You know, in the Dead Sea in the background. And so here's a close-up of another piece of brimstone in the formations that we opened up. You can see the unconsumed sulfur inside.
How many times have you been to this particular site?
Well, I made 3 trips over there to Israel, but I went to the site, you know, numerous times while there, many hours. It's very impressive. Originally, I was not real impressed with the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff, but once you go out there yourself and start seeing this firsthand, it's very impressive to see it come to life in front of you.
Now, some of these are in vertical. They're basically shot into the sides of the walls. Or some of them are found in vertical.
Yeah, they're in, you know,
walls.
various locations, and some people have. Well, I think Ron Wyatt thought they may have originally been about a foot in diameter originally, and then burned down to the smaller size. And here's a 90-degree angle, sort of like a window in the side of the formations. Pretty impressive. Here is another sphinx. Now this one's in Gomorrah again, and in the background is a ziggurat shape. So sphinx, ziggurat. In Egypt you have a sphinx pyramid, you know, near each other. But this is on a raised area, sort of like a high place. Here's a close-up of the sphinx from another angle.
Oh, there you can see it. You can see the shape.
Yes.
It's definitely something man-made there.
Right, and this is again an elevated area for worship. There it is again, and the background is Masada. And this is about 40 feet long. This is a large sphinx shape here. Very impressive. And then near it, we saw in the distance, was this ziggurat.
And those, you know, it should be just outcroppings like that. Again, more evidence that there's something different here. This was specifically made here. This was intentional.
And then here, this was taken down at the south end of the Dead Sea is Zoar. Zoar was later consumed. And it has kind of a square. If you see the light ash there, this has kind of a square shape, the white ash there.
So like today, the downtown core areas of most cities are grids, because that's where they start, and then the sprawl begins.
And they branch out, lose its square shape, Here's another image in Zoar of a square image in the background.
So this is drone footage. What are we seeing here?
Yes, so here we're looking down on the formations, and then I'm panning up.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah, and you can see across the city there.
Now this city, which city is this one?
This would be considered Gomorrah.
Okay.
The Bible gives the cities in order, creating the Canaanite border, and this would be the third city that's mentioned, starting from the south and going up.
So this is much larger than Zoar. This is huge.
Yes, right, this is huge. Sodom and Gomorrah were the 2 largest. That's why a lot of times you hear them say Sodom and Gomorrah, and they don't mention the other cities because they were smaller. But in the distance is the Dead Sea.
And this is all city, or some of this the hillside surrounding?
This would be all city here that we're looking at. Previously we did see Masada in the background, but at this point this would be all city.
How tall are the walls here? I mean, at estimation, what were the heights of these buildings?
About 30 feet, a lot of them. It's quite large.
And what are we seeing there? Is that a street or where the river runs?
A lot of these would be streets. And of course, there has been some erosion since the time. And there's the base of Masada in the background.
Now, some of these, like on the right-hand side there, you can see that one little area on the second level, as it were.
Yes.
That is very right angled.
Right,
that looks
and far
different.
right here, yes,
Yeah, you can't deny that was something man-made.
Yes.
And what are we seeing here as we zoom in over this area?
These are more of the remains here. You can see, again, the flat wall on the right here, right center. It's almost buried.
And that's all that's all the crystallization on top and brimstone underneath, I would assume.
Some of it would be. Most of this is just loose ash.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, ash, not dirt.
Right, right.
This did happen here.
Yes.
So why do you think it is that archaeologists still dispute that these are the cities, and they claim that they were swallowed up into the Dead Sea?
I don't understand. I mean, the evidence here is so clear. It's very interesting.
Wow, look at that. So you've gone out here several times. You bring people with you, or do you explore on your own?
Well, it's usually just friends I bring out there to take a look.
Okay.
But very exciting to see.
Now,
it's also sad. I mean, you got to realize that there were, perhaps 200,000 people that died here in Gomorrah.
Now, you had mentioned a few minutes ago about bones, human bones.
Yes.
Do we want to get into that before we run out of time?
We can. We can show what we have here in the display box that I brought. But in the top left, you can see the naturally occurring rhombic sulfur.
And that's found elsewhere in the world?
And elsewhere, yes. It's just 50% sulfur. On the left side, we see 2 pieces of brimstone, one in the hardened shell, the other one in the bottom left is out of the shell. And then in the top center, we see something that looks melted, a melted substance. In the bottom center, we can see cremated bone. Dr. Leonard Moeller, in his book, The Exodus Case, he has an image of a pelvic bone and vertebrae that he found out there.
This is the same Leonard Moeller who was on Michael Rood's Red Sea Crossing.
That's
he was the captain of the boat, as it were.
Yes. And then on the right side here, we have some of the consumed brimstone where it turned into a liquid, and when it cooled down, it crystallized. So these are crystals here on the right side.
And that's what we saw in that 6-foot pool that you were showing earlier.
Right, the crystals.
That is just eerie, especially the bone.
Yes.
That makes it, why would there be people's bones out there? Why would they be cremated? What's with the ash all around the area?
Sir. It all adds up, doesn't it?
It does. It's just too obvious. Well, this has been fascinating, Kevin. Thank you very much. We've got way more to talk about here. We're going to talk about Kadesh Barnea. We're going to talk about the Red Sea crossing, Mount Sinai, the Ark of the Covenant, and our final episode is going to be Noah's Ark.
Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground.
Brimstone. Our first sample was found here, having been washed down from a higher location. This is the heavenly marker left behind, which proves the sites to be the real Sodom and Gomorrah. Ron Wyatt was the original discoverer of these cities in 1989, and he now describes the brimstone found here.
Okay, we're down at Sodom and Gomorrah still. Right in front of you see some unusual looking spots on this, shall we say, layer of ash. It's not stone, it's ash. Now we'll move in for a close-up of this. And you can see that they're kind of circular shaped places. Now what we have found, and we'll move in a little closer here, is that inside each of these is sulfur. That is, in most of them. Now the ones that do not have sulfur in them, and this one we just took a bunch of sulfur out and put it in our specimen bag. But the ones that don't have sulfur have a very black center where they have, where it's been very hot. So now we'll move in on this one where there is some sulfur still present, and back off just enough so you can see what we're up to here, and we'll go collect that sample in a bag. Before I started using this knife, it was very, very sharp. Okay, here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur. Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it. After it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then of course smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur, and there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here. Now, some of them we have cracked open so you can see the sulfur inside, and others we have left intact, but there are millions of these here. So this shows that God indeed rained fire and brimstone upon these cities. And if you look in your dictionary under brimstone, you'll find that it is sulfur.
A piece of the brimstone from the cities was lit at night, and soon there was a beautiful blue flame produced by the burning sulfur. A very strong aroma of sulfur filled the air, and was overpowering if one directly breathed the fumes. Exploring the cities further, more brimstone was found of various shapes and sizes. Several samples had been washed down to areas below and were added to our growing collection. This brimstone is made of monoclinic, white sulfur that has been burned or cooked at a high temperature. It is quite different from natural sulfur that is formed in geothermal areas. Samples were taken to a lab for analysis. Each specimen was carefully separated and prepared for testing, with the outer portion cast aside. Next, the samples were dried and placed in a rock crusher. Then they were pressed onto a disc. Then they were loaded into a machine for the semi-quantitative X-ray analysis. Each sample was individually transported into the testing chamber for analysis. The results proved to be quite amazing. As the samples were found to be 98% pure sulfur, unlike any other sulfur found on Earth. This pure, cooked sulfur is the heavenly marker that was left behind to show the world that the Lord, without a doubt, destroyed these sinful cities at His command. Critics have said that the sulfur is from volcanic activity, but that type of rhombic sulfur is only 40% sulfur and is of a crystalline form, unlike the white, compacted monoclinic form that is found in the ashen cities today. Here is a round piece of brimstone embedded in a section of ash. Another clump of ash contains a piece of brimstone that has a burn ring surrounding the unburned sulfur inside. This mound of material has a lid that easily comes off, revealing the round nugget of brimstone inside. As we gaze across the southern end of the Dead Sea, we can view the El Lisan Peninsula in Jordan. Apparently the city of Gomorrah extended over to this peninsula in the days of Lot. One can find the same white formations in this area. Back over at Gomorrah proper, we can see white, ashen worship structures built atop an acropolis or high place. Both a sphinx and ziggurat are seen here, side by side, much like what we see in Egypt at Giza, with the sphinx and the pyramids built in close proximity to each other. The sphinx represented a god of protection, but even it was consumed in the flames. It is approximately 30 feet long and is quite impressive, both in its shape and size. Resting near it is the ziggurat, symmetrical in shape and also comprised of a special white material. Here we can see a ziggurat standing next to a symmetrical tower. Next, we can see an arched door between two pillars, and once again, another arched door. As we scan across the city, our eye notices a raised white formation in the distance. As we near the formation, we can see it is in the shape of a ziggurat. It turns out there are actually two ziggurats on this raised acropolis. The most impressive evidence was this cremated bone fragment that was left behind from some lost soul of Gomorrah. The bone marrow inside was cooked until it had turned white. This is a moving testimony of God's power to destroy those who reject the Holy Spirit.
And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death.
Jehovah said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were full of evil, licentiousness, rampant with murder, and indulgence in extravagant pleasures. They reached the point of clamoring against God, of fighting against him, and raging his disposition.
Where are the men which came into you this night? Bring them out to us, that we may know them.
After the angels took Lot and his family out of the city, burning sulfur rained down from the sky. The raging fire lit up the heavens.
Hurry up!
My house!
Our lives are on the line. Who cares about the house?
I'm not afraid. Just one look. Just one look.
Sodom, Gomorrah, and all their residents were reduced to ashes, disappearing into the wrath of God.